of peace, and when there is no fear of the plague. At length, towards noon, we approached the mountains of Judea. Here we must bid farewell to the beautiful, fruitful valley and to the charming road, and pursue our journey through a stony region, which we do not pass without difficulty. At the entrance of the mountain chain lies a miserable village. Near this village is a well, and here we halted to refresh ourselves and water our poor horses. It was not without a great deal of trouble and some expense that we managed to obtain a little water, for all the camels, asses, goats, and sheep from far and wide were collected here, eagerly licking up every drop of the refreshing element they could secure. Little did I think I should ever be glad to quench my thirst with so disgusting a beverage as this muddy, turbid, and lukewarm water they gave me from this well. We once more filled our leathern bottles, and proceeded with fresh courage up the stony path, which quickly became so narrow that without great difficulty and danger we could not pass the camels which we frequently met. Fortunately a few camels out of every herd are generally provided with bells, so that their approach is heard at some distance, and one can prepare for them accordingly. The Bedouins and Arabs generally wear no garment but a shirt barely reaching to the knee. Their head is protected by a linen cloth, to which a thick rope wound twice round the head gives a very good effect. A few have a striped jacket over their shirt, and the rich men or chiefs frequently wear turbans. Our road now continues to wind upwards, through ravines, between rocks and mountains, and over heaps of stones. Here and there single olive trees are seen sprouting from the rocky clefts. Ugly as this tree is, it still forms a cheerful feature in the desert places where it grows. Now and then we climbed hills whence we had a distant view of the sea. These glimpses increase the awe which inspires the traveller when he considers on what ground he is wandering, and whither he is bending his steps. Every step we now take leads us past places of religious importance. Every ruin, every fragment of a fortress or tower, above which the rocky walls rise like terraces, speaks of eventful times long gone by. An uninterrupted ride of 5 hours over very bad roads, from the entrance of the mountain range, added to the extreme heat and total want of proper refreshment, suddenly brought on such a violent giddiness that I could scarcely keep myself from falling off my horse. Although we had been on horseback for 11 hours since leaving Joppa, I was so much afraid that Mr. B. would consider me weak and ailing, and perhaps change his intention of accompanying me from Jerusalem back to Joppa, that I refrained from acquainting him with the condition in which I felt myself. I therefore dismounted. Had I not done so, I should soon have fallen down, and walked with tottering steps beside my horse, until I felt so far recovered that I could mount once more. Mr. B. had determined to perform the distance from Joppa to Jerusalem, a 16 hours' ride, at one stretch. He indeed asked me if I could bear so much fatigue, but I was unwilling to abuse his kindness, and therefore assured him that I could manage to ride on for 5 or 6 hours longer. Fortunately for my reputation, my companion was soon afterwards attacked with the same symptoms that troubled me so much. He now began to think that it might, after all, be advisable to rest for a few hours in the next village, especially as we could not hope in any case to reach the gates of Jerusalem before sundown. I felt silently thankful for this opportune occurrence, and left the question of going on or stopping altogether to the decision of my fellow traveller, particularly as I knew the course he would choose. Thus I accomplished my object without being obliged to confess my weakness. In pursuance of this resolve, we stayed in the neighbouring village of Kiryat el Arab, the ancient Emmaus, where the risen Saviour met the disciples, and where we find a ruin of a Christian church in a tolerable state of preservation. The building is now used as a stable. Some years ago this was the haunt of a famous robber, who was sheik of the place, and let no Frank pass before he had paid whatever tribute he chose to demand. Since the accession of Mehemet Ali, these exactions have ceased both here and in Jerusalem, where money was demanded of the stranger for admission into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and other sacred places. Even highway robberies, which were once on a time of daily occurrence among these mountains, are now rarely heard of. We took possession of the entrance hall of a mosque, near which a delicious spring sparkled forth from a grotto. Seldom has anything strengthened and refreshed me so much as the water of this spring. I recovered completely from my indisposition, and was able to enjoy the beautiful evening. As soon as the sheykh of the village heard that a party of Franks had arrived, he despatched 4 or 5 dishes of provisions to us. Of all these preparations we could eat only one, the buttermilk. The other dishes, a mixture of honey, cucumbers, hard-boiled eggs, onions, oil, olives, etc., we generously bestowed upon the dragoman and the muker, who caused them quickly to disappear. An hour afterwards the sheykh came in person to pay his respects. We reclined on the steps of the hall, and while the men smoked and drank coffee, a conversation of a very uninteresting kind was kept up, the dragoman acting as interpreter. At length the sheykh seemed seized with the idea that we might possibly be tired with our journey. He took his leave, and offered unasked to send us 2 men as sentries, which he did. Thus we could go to rest in perfect safety under the open sky in the midst of a Turkish village. But before we retired to rest, my companion was seized with the rather original idea that we should pursue our journey at midnight. He asked me, indeed, if I was afraid, but at the same time observed that it would be much safer for us to act upon his suggestion, as no one would suspect our departure by such a dangerous road at midnight. I certainly felt a little afraid, but my pride would not allow me to confess the truth, so our people received the order to be prepared to set out at midnight. Thus we 4 persons, alone and totally unarmed, travelled at midnight through the wildest and most dangerous regions. Fortunately the bright moon looked smiling down upon us, and illuminated our path so brightly that the horses carried us with firm step over every obstruction. I was, I must confess, grievously frightened by the shadows. I saw living things moving to and fro, forms gigantic and forms dwarfish seemed sometimes approaching us, sometimes hiding behind masses of rock, or sinking back into nothingness. Lights and shadows, fears and anxiety, thus took alternate possession of my imagination. A couple of miles from our starting place we came upon a brook crossed by a narrow stone bridge. This brook is remarkable only as having been that from which David collected the 5 stones wherewith he slew the Philistine giant. At the season of my visit there was no water to be seen. The bed of the stream was completely dry. About an hour's journey from Jerusalem the valley opens, and little orchards give indication of a more fertile country, as well as of the proximity of the Holy City. Silently and thoughtfully we approached our destination, straining our eyes to the utmost to pierce the jealous twilight that shrouded the distance from our gaze. From the next hill we hoped to behold our sacred goal, but hope deferred is often the lot of mortals. We had to ascend another height, and another. At last the Mount of Olives lay spread before us, and lastly Jerusalem. End of section 12.